With Korea's 22nd general election just 20 days away, candidate registrations will begin tomorrow, essentially marking the start of the election race. For more, our National Assembly correspondent Shin Ha-young joins me in the studio. Welcome, Ha-young.
Great to be here, Jung-min.
So, Ha-young, tell me, it looks like both the ruling and opposition parties are now in the final stages of candidate nominations.
You're absolutely right, Jung-min. The nomination process for both ruling and opposition parties is nearing its end, adding to the election buzz. And starting Thursday, candidate registration will take place over the 2 days from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And personal details including asset declarations, military service status, and criminal records of registered candidates will be publicly available through the National Election Commission's website. And meanwhile, both the ruling and opposition parties already formed their election campaign committees last week to oversee their election strategies and campaign. The People Power Party's committee emphasized the importance of winning in metropolitan areas, while the Democratic Party of Korea highlighted the 4 key themes: innovation, integration, public participation, and judgment of the Yoon administration.
And how are these parties preparing for the upcoming election? And I wonder if there's any specific pledges that's worth noticing.
Well, the two parties each announced their 10 key pledges for the coming up election, with a shared emphasis on tackling the country's low birth rate. The PPP outlined its key pledges, focusing on 3 primary agendas: addressing the low birth rate, narrowing the widening wealth gap, and addressing climate change. And the party pledged to establish a new ministry which would focus on the country's population, create a special account to generate funds to combat the declining birth rate, and introduce mandatory 1-month paid leave for fathers. And on the other hand, the DP's commitments are centered around 4 major objectives: enhancing people's livelihoods, providing hope for the future, protecting democracy, and fostering peace. And the party's focus lies in extending financial assistance to newly wed couples, such as providing public rental housing to couples with more than 1 child and offering low-rate loans regardless of income level.
And for this year's election, which regions should we be paying attention to?
Well, there are several regions to keep our eyes on for the upcoming election, but among them, cities with major chip makers plants, including SK Hynix and Samsung Electronics in Gyeonggi-do Province, known as the Semiconductor Belt, are emerging as pivotal swing regions. Parties have been announcing chip-related pledges and nominating influential candidates in these areas. And the PPP has appealed for support for the government and the party to provide stable support for the chip industry. Take a listen.
The Semiconductor Belt is essentially a creation of the People Power Party. We are the ruling party, and President Yoon has made a lot of diplomatic efforts regarding semiconductor issues.
The ruling party pledged full support for the government's plan to create a mega chip cluster in Gyeonggi-do Province by 2047 and simplify the process of chip development and investment permits. And meanwhile, the main opposition party has committed to creating an ecosystem for a semiconductor powerhouse through regulatory reforms and tax incentives. And these include extending the tax deduction deadline for investments in national strategic technologies and establishing so-called semiconductor megacities in the southern and eastern regions of Gyeonggi-do Province. Take a listen.
The semiconductor industry is the key engine for South Korea's economy. With the increasing significance of chips, competition is escalating, transforming into a national-level competition.
And the election is just about 3 weeks away. What are watchers saying about this year's election?
Well, this year's election has been framed as a choice between judging the opposition-led National Assembly and judging the government. The PPP is determined to reshape the composition of South Korea's parliament, which is currently dominated by the main opposition party. And on the other hand, as the Yoon administration enters its 3rd year in office, the DP is determined to maintain its dominance to act as a counterbalance to the ruling party and the Yoon administration. And meanwhile, the emergence of third parties is also regarded as a significant factor to consider in this year's election landscape. And after the 2-day registration, candidates can run their official election campaign from next Thursday until April 9, the day before the general election. So we'll have more updates later.
It's a high-stakes election. All right, thanks for your report today, Ha-young.
My pleasure.